Claire always believed her marriage was the kind others envied. Friends called her lucky, whispering about Marcus as though he were the blueprint of a perfect husband, successful, attentive in public, effortlessly charming. Their home, a white bricked house with roses climbing the porch railings, reflected that same impression of balance and stability. To anyone looking in, they were the portrait of marital bliss. But inside those walls, Claire sometimes caught herself staring at the spaces between them, the silence that stretched longer than it used to. Marcus had once filled evenings with stories from work, laughter that spilled over their dinner table, kisses pressed absent-mindedly against her forehead. Lately, though, his voice carried a practiced flatness, as if every word had been weighed before leaving his lips. It began subtly. A missed dinner brushed off with late meeting, don't wait up. A forgotten anniversary, quickly patched with flowers the next morning. Claire told herself it was stress, that every marriage bent beneath life's pressures. Still, she couldn't shake the flicker of unease when his phone buzzed, and he turned his body just slightly away, shielding the screen. One night, as she folded laundry, Marcus entered their bedroom still dressed in his work clothes. His tie hung loose, his expression unreadable. "You're home late again," she said carefully, eyes lingering on the clock. He smiled, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "You know how it is. Deadlines, clients, nothing new." Claire forced a smile back, but inside, doubt curled tighter. The house began to feel colder, even when the fire glowed in the hearth. She caught herself listening for his footsteps, measuring the weight of his presence and noticing the absence instead. Yet in public, Marcus held her hand and kissed her cheek with such conviction that her own family remained fooled. The illusion remained flawless, but Claire could sense the cracks widening beneath the surface. On Sunday morning, she stood by the window watching Marcus in the garden. He trimmed the hedges with mechanical precision, never once glancing back at her. Something about his stillness unsettled her. She had always thought of Marcus as her anchor, but anchors, she realized, can also drag you into the deep. As the autumn wind rattled the glass, a strange heaviness settled in her chest. For the first time, Claire wondered if the life she had built was nothing more than a performance. A mask Marcus wore so convincingly that even she had believed it. That night, lying beside him in silence, she stared at the ceiling and felt the first shadow of fear. It was the kind of fear that whispered, "The truth is waiting, and it will not be kind and soon." The whispers would grow louder. The silence of the bedroom had once been comforting to Claire. The slow rhythm of Marcus's breathing beside her, the familiar warmth of his arm brushing hers. Now, that silence felt broken, invaded by sounds she was never meant to hear. It started on a Thursday night. Claire woke to the faint hum of Marcus's voice in the study downstairs. At first, she thought he was on a late business call, nothing unusual. But as she listened, she noticed the way his words dipped into whispers. The pauses too long, as though waiting for secret instructions. She slipped quietly from the bed, the wooden floor cold under her bare feet. Standing halfway down the staircase, she could just make out fragments. "No, she doesn't know I've taken care of it, not yet." The words twisted in her mind like barbed wire. Taken care of what? Who didn't she know about? Claire pressed a hand against her chest, trying to calm the panic that clawed its way up her throat. When Marcus returned to bed, she feigned sleep, her body stiff as stone. His movements were casual, the unbuttoning of his shirt, the creak of the mattress. But something in the air told her he was different, detached. The following nights, it happened again. The same hushed tone, the same fragments of phrases that seemed half-coded, half-dangerous. Claire began writing them down in a small notebook hidden inside her nightstand drawer. "Won't suspect a thing. Keep it quiet or it's over." She's starting to notice. Each line deepened her dread. The man she had loved for 10 years. The man who had once recited poetry in her ear and kissed her knuckles at dinner parties, was now speaking in a voice that belonged to a stranger. On the 5th night, unable to stop herself, she confronted him. "Who were you talking to?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound calm. Marcus looked up from the glow of his phone, expression unreadable. "A client. You know how demanding they can be. At midnight?" She pressed. His eyes hardened just for a second before softening again. "Claire, you're overthinking. Go back to sleep." The words were gentle, but they landed like stones. Gaslighting, subtle, suffocating. Claire forced a nod, though her heart screamed with suspicion. The following morning, Marcus was unusually affectionate, brewing her coffee, brushing a hand across her cheek as though nothing had happened. But that performance only made the whispers echo louder in her head. Claire began to wonder if Marcus had secrets that stretched far beyond infidelity. The way he spoke, she doesn't know, left her rattled. Who was she? And what didn't Claire know? At night, when the whispers returned, Claire no longer felt like a wife beside her husband. She felt like a spy trapped in her own home, documenting every shift in tone, every secret word that dripped like poison into the air. And though she couldn't prove it yet, Claire's heart told her something unforgivable was about to surface. The stranger in Marcus's eyes was growing bolder. Dinner had always been their ritual, a quiet place to reconnect after long days, to share stories over glasses of wine. But lately the table felt more like a stage, and Marcus a reluctant actor reading lines he no longer believed. That evening, Claire set his favorite dish before him, roasted lamb with rosemary. He barely glanced at it, his fork scraping the plate without tasting. His eyes remained fixed on the tablecloth, avoiding hers. "How was work?" she asked softly. "Fine," he replied, his tone clipped, dismissive. She studied him in the flicker of candlelight. There was a hardness there, a coldness that didn't belong to the man she married. The Marcus she knew used to smile at her across this table, his gaze tender, alive. Tonight, when he finally looked up, she saw only distance. It was like staring at a stranger wearing her husband's face. Claire's throat tightened. "Marcus, is something wrong between us?" He gave a short laugh, empty of warmth. "You're imagining things again." Again, the word landed like a blade. She wanted to push further, to demand honesty. But the look in his eyes warned her, that sharp, narrowing gaze that told her he would twist her words back on her. So she fell silent, chewing on her own doubt instead of dinner. Later that night, Claire reached out to her sister, Julia. She typed quickly, "He's not himself. Something's wrong. I feel like I don't even know him anymore." She hesitated, then pressed send. The reply came minutes later. "Claire, trust your instincts. Be careful." But when she checked her phone the next morning, the message thread was gone. Deleted. Claire's stomach dropped. She hadn't erased it. Marcus must have. The realization chilled her more than the whispers ever had. That evening, Marcus leaned close as she folded laundry. His smile was gentle, his voice velvet. "You've been anxious lately. Maybe you should stop talking to Julia about me. It only makes things worse." Her breath caught. He knew. He always knew. Claire nodded, forcing a weak smile. But inside, panic spread like wildfire. She was losing him. Not just his affection, but her ability to hold on to the truth. And the more she stared into his eyes, the more certain she became. Marcus was hiding something that went far beyond a husband's lie. The mask was slipping. The doubt that had been gnawing at Claire finally broke into action one quiet morning. While putting away laundry in Marcus's study, she noticed an envelope tucked beneath a pile of unopened mail. At first, she thought little of it, but curiosity made her slide the paper free. It was a bank statement. Her eyes scanned the numbers, her pulse quickening with every line. Thousands withdrawn, transfers to an account she had never seen before. Marcus had always prided himself on transparency, on sharing every financial detail of their lives. Yet here was undeniable proof of secrecy and betrayal. The page trembled in her hand as she folded it back, shoving it where she found it. But the seed of suspicion had grown roots, and Claire knew she couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, when Marcus claimed another late meeting, she followed him. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She kept her headlights low, trailing him through back streets until his car pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel. Her breath hitched as she watched him step out, scanning the lot like a man expecting to be hunted. Then, someone joined him. A figure slipped from the shadows, moving quickly toward him. Claire couldn't make out the face, just the outline. A woman's shape, hurried, familiar yet unrecognizable. They disappeared inside. Claire sat frozen, heart pounding. Betrayal slammed into her chest with suffocating force. She wanted to scream, to storm into the motel and demand the truth, but something inside her held her back, a whisper of fear, not just fear of infidelity, but of what else Marcus was capable of hiding. She stayed there for nearly an hour, staring at the glowing door that concealed him. When he finally emerged alone, his posture was calm, almost smug. He drove away as if nothing had happened. Claire didn't follow this time. Instead, she sat in the dark lot, her breath fogging the windshield, her mind unraveling faster than the lies Marcus so carefully stitched together. When she returned home, she didn't confront him. Not yet, because a voice inside her warned the moment she ripped the mask away, she might discover something far worse than betrayal. And deep down, she already knew. The mask was about to slip further. Claire noticed the change almost immediately. Marcus, once effortlessly charming, now carried a simmering edge beneath his words. Where laughter used to soften their evenings, sharpness cut through instead. One night, when she asked, "Marcus, where were you really?" His eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "You're imagining things again, Claire," he said, voice smooth but laced with venom. "I work late. That's all. You've built some fantasy in your head because you're bored." The dismissal stung more than the lie. He reached across the table, brushing her hand in what might have seemed affectionate, but the pressure in his touch felt more like control. In the following days, his gaslighting grew sharper. If she mentioned his late hours, he mocked her suspicion. If she asked about the missing money, he laughed, insisting she misread the numbers. When she caught him deleting her sister's messages, he claimed, "You must be tired. Stress does strange things to memory." Claire began questioning herself in the mirror. Was she paranoid? Delusional? But the knot in her stomach whispered otherwise. Then came the discovery. While Marcus showered one evening, she quietly unlatched his briefcase. Inside were papers, receipts, nothing unusual, until her hand brushed against a photograph wedged in a side pocket. She pulled it free, heart pounding. It was Marcus, younger but unmistakably him. His arm was wrapped tightly around a woman Claire had never seen. Her smile was radiant, almost intimate, the kind that spoke of secrets shared in shadows. Claire's breath caught, her knees buckling as she sank onto the edge of the bed. The image felt like proof, not just of betrayal, but of a life Marcus had deliberately hidden from her. When Marcus stepped out of the bathroom, steam curling around him, she shoved the photo back into the briefcase, her hands shaking. He didn't notice. He never did, but Claire did. And once seen, it could not be unseen. That night, as Marcus drifted to sleep beside her, Claire lay awake, staring into the darkness. The mask had slipped, and what lay beneath was something unrecognizable. Her marriage was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, and she was beginning to realize the cost of staying silent. And soon, silence would no longer be an option. The storm outside battered the windows, as though the night itself had chosen sides. Rain streaked down in sheets and thunder shook the glass. Inside, Claire clutched the photograph she had pulled once more from Marcus's briefcase. Her hands shook, but her resolve no longer wavered. When Marcus entered the kitchen, dripping from the storm, she placed the photo on the table. The overhead light flickered, casting shadows across his face. "What is this?" Her voice was steady, but her chest ached with fear. Marcus froze. For a heartbeat, silence filled the space between them, heavy and suffocating. Then he smiled, that cold, practiced smile she had come to dread. "Where did you find that?" "In your things," Claire answered. "Who is she, Marcus?" His jaw tightened, the mask slipping further. "You shouldn't go through my things." "That's a violation, Claire. A violation," she snapped, her voice breaking. "What about this? What about her?" The storm outside cracked with thunder as Marcus's hand slammed against the table. "Enough," he roared, eyes blazing. "You twist everything. You hear whispers, you see ghosts, and now you invent stories from an old photograph." "I'm not imagining this," she cried. "You've been lying to me. I can feel it, every night, every word." "Who is she?" For the first time, Marcus's composure shattered. He grabbed the photograph, crumpling it in his fist. His breath came heavy, his eyes wild. "You don't know what you're talking about. You never have." Claire backed toward the counter, her trembling fingers brushing the handle of a kitchen knife left from dinner. She didn't pick it up, but the gesture didn't escape Marcus. His gaze dropped to it, then back to her. The room spun with rage, accusation, and something darker than either of them could name. The fight escalated, voices overlapping, furniture rattling as Marcus shoved the table aside. Claire screamed, her fear rising above the storm. A sudden slip, a struggle, and then silence broken by the sickening sound of impact. When Claire opened her eyes, her breath came in ragged gasps. She was on the floor, palms pressed against the cold tile, and there, smeared across the surface, was blood, thick, crimson, glistening beneath the flickering light. Her body trembled violently. She stared at the stain, but her mind refused to piece it together. Whose blood was it? His or hers? The storm raged on, indifferent to the horror that had just begun. The storm had barely passed when flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of Claire's house. Neighbors had called after hearing the screams and the violent crash. Officers swarmed the kitchen, their boots echoing against the tile where the blood still smeared across the floor. Claire sat trembling at the table, her hands wrapped in a blanket. Across from her, Marcus played the part of a wounded husband. He pressed a towel to a shallow cut on his forehead, his eyes sharp but his voice calm. "She attacked me," Marcus said firmly to the officer taking notes. "She's been unstable for weeks, paranoid. I tried to calm her down, but she snapped." Claire's head shot up. "That's not true. He's lying." Her voice cracked, raw from crying. The detective in charge, a graying man named Harlow, studied them both with measured suspicion. His gaze drifted to the broken chair, the overturned glass, the blood. Nothing in the room screamed of one clear aggressor. "Mrs. Whitmore," Harlow said carefully, "did you strike your husband?" Claire shook her head violently. "No, I confronted him with proof. A photograph. He destroyed it." Marcus cut in sharply. There was no photograph. She imagined it. Like everything else. The words slithered into the room like poison, but Harlow didn't look convinced. He flipped open his notepad. "What proof exactly, Mrs. Whitmore?" Claire swallowed hard. "A picture of him with a woman I've never seen, intimate, secret." At this, Harlow's brow furrowed. He glanced at his partner, then back at Marcus. "What was her name?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "I don't know what she's talking about." But within days, detectives uncovered more. They traced the description Claire provided, running it against missing persons. Their search led to a chilling discovery. The woman in the photo had vanished nearly 7 years ago. No trace, no closure. And the last person ever confirmed to be with her was Marcus Whitmore. The illusion of his innocence began to crumble. Claire, still shaken, clung to the blanket tighter. The blood on the kitchen floor was no longer the only stain. A deeper shadow was surfacing, one Marcus could no longer bury beneath his charm. And for the first time, Marcus's eyes revealed not control, but fear. The days after Marcus's arrest blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and endless questioning. Claire sat in the dimly lit interview room, her reflection in the one-way glass almost unrecognizable. The detectives asked her to recount everything. Every word, every bruise hidden under sleeves, every time Marcus had twisted truth into a weapon. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "He never had to raise a hand to make me feel small. A look was enough. A silence that lasted too long. I thought it was love. I thought I was failing him." Detective Harlow leaned forward, his expression grave but patient. "Mrs. Whitmore, you said he controlled your friendships, even your sister's messages. Did you ever feel unsafe before the night of the fight?" Claire hesitated. Memories clawed their way to the surface. Marcus's subtle punishments, the way he'd whisper she was nothing without him. "Yes," she admitted softly, "but I kept telling myself it was normal, that every marriage had cracks. I didn't want to believe I was trapped." The confession left her trembling, yet it was the guilt that gnawed at her more than fear. Despite everything, she still caught herself defending him in the quiet of her mind. The Marcus she had fallen in love with lingered like a ghost. The man who once brought her roses after her mother's funeral. The man who whispered promises beneath the stars. Detective Harlow didn't miss the conflict in her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said gently, "love doesn't erase danger. Blinds you to it." Her chest tightened. Was she blind or complicit? The question haunted her as much as Marcus's secrets. If the woman in the photo was truly gone, what did that make her husband? And what did that make her for staying all these years? Nights alone in the house felt colder now. Every creak in the hallway, every shadow beyond the curtains pressed down like a suffocating reminder. She feared Marcus, yes, but she also feared herself. Feared she might collapse under the weight of the truth and betray it, just as he had betrayed her. And yet, beneath her fear, one truth whispered louder. Marcus's mask had slipped, but the full extent of his darkness was only beginning to surface. The detectives worked tirelessly, sifting through Marcus's polished life the way one peels back layers of rotting wallpaper. Every document, every phone record, every digital trace began to whisper a truth darker than anyone expected. Detective Harlow spread the evidence across the interrogation table like pieces of a grotesque puzzle. Bank accounts under different names, passports with Marcus's photo but different identities, deposits made to shell companies connected to women who had since vanished. Claire sat across from him, her hands clutching her sleeves, knuckles white. Each photograph and document pushed her deeper into despair. The man she thought she knew was a phantom crafted from lies. "Mrs. Whitmore," Harlow said quietly, "we believe Marcus had more than one life. Affairs, financial crimes, possibly worse. The missing woman in the photograph may not have been his first victim." The words hit Claire like a blade. She wanted to scream, to deny, to retreat into the safety of her old illusions, but her mind kept replaying the subtle red flags she had ignored. The unexplained late nights, the fleeting shadows of rage in his eyes, the empty apologies she clung to like lifelines. She whispered, barely audible, "How long has he been doing this?" Harlow's eyes met hers, steady and grim. "Longer than you think. We believe Marcus is connected to at least 3 disappearances, and his financial trail suggests blackmail, extortion, manipulation that reaches far beyond your marriage." Claire's stomach twisted. Every shared meal, every touch, every whispered "I love you" now seemed like part of a performance staged for her benefit. The betrayal wasn't just intimate, it was monumental. She pressed her palms to her face, choking back tears. "I should have seen it. I should have known." "No," Harlow corrected gently. "He wanted you not to know. He built his mask for you most of all." The realization left her hollow. Marcus hadn't only deceived the world. He had sculpted her love into a shield, hiding behind it while weaving his labyrinth of deceit. The detectives gathered the evidence, their voices low but urgent. The case was no longer just about domestic abuse or a single missing woman. It was about dismantling a predator who had perfected the art of disguise. And as Claire left the station that night, the weight of truth pressed down heavier than ever. For the first time, she realized the twisted story wasn't finished. It was only beginning to unfold, and she was trapped in the center of it. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its marble pillars gleaming cold in the morning light. Inside, whispers rippled through the crowd as Marcus was led in, suited, composed, every inch the charismatic husband he had always pretended to be. His eyes found Claire's across the room, and for a fleeting second, he almost smiled, as though the entire trial were merely another performance for her benefit. From the first gavel strike, Marcus's strategy became clear: distort, deny, and dismantle. His attorney painted him as a devoted husband, trapped in the spiral of his wife's paranoia. Each time Claire took the stand, Marcus's gaze was unwavering, silently twisting her courage into doubt. She fabricated stories of abuse, the defense claimed, voice booming. She created monsters out of shadows. What you see is not a criminal, but a man whose life has been poisoned by a wife desperate for attention. Claire gripped the edges of the witness box until her fingers went numb. Her voice cracked as she spoke of the phone calls, the photograph, the blood. But Marcus's smirk lingered, subtle enough that only she could see it. A cruel reminder that he still knew how to pull her strings. The prosecution struck back with the evidence: forged passports, financial crimes, the missing woman's connection. Photographs were laid before the jury, each one a dagger to Marcus's carefully woven narrative. Yet his lawyer's brilliance chipped away at certainty, suggesting alternative explanations, exploiting every gap in the timeline. The courtroom became a battlefield where truth and lies blurred into smoke. And Claire, fragile and haunted, stood in the middle, her testimony faltering under Marcus's manipulative weight. But then, The twist came. The prosecution revealed not only Marcus's crimes but Claire's silent complicity. Bank records tied her name, her signature, to one of Marcus's shell accounts. The jury gasped as whispers surged like a wave. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She had never touched those accounts, never signed anything, but doubt was a weapon Marcus wielded well, and now it was embedded in her skin. Perhaps she wasn't only blind, the defense attorney suggested slyly. Perhaps she benefited. The trial spiraled into chaos. Claire's pleas of innocence sounded desperate, even to her own ears. She could see the uncertainty in the jury's faces, could feel Marcus's satisfaction radiating across the room. When the verdict came, it was a storm no one expected. Marcus was found guilty on charges of fraud and identity theft, but the jury could not unanimously link him to the missing woman's disappearance. And Claire, though spared conviction, was condemned by public opinion, painted as either a co-conspirator or a wife too broken to see the truth until it was too late. As the gavel fell, Marcus turned to her with that same hollow smile, his shackled hands raised slightly in mock salute. He had lost his freedom, but in some twisted way he had dragged her down with him, and as Claire left the courtroom, cameras flashing, questions shouted, she realized justice had not been served. It had been twisted, reshaped into another mask Marcus would wear forever. The world outside the courthouse was merciless. Reporters crowded Claire at every step, their voices cutting through the air like blades. Did you know? Were you involved? Do you still love him? Their questions echoed long after she closed the door of her empty home. Days passed in silence, yet the silence was never clean. It carried Marcus's voice, the memory of his smirk, the shadows of every moment she had swallowed her doubts. Sleep offered no refuge. Her dreams replayed the trial, each verdict delivered again and again. When detectives returned, urging her to give a formal statement for the record, Claire agreed. She sat in the same gray interview room where she had once told them she was blind to Marcus's deceit. Only now, her voice carried a different weight. I knew pieces, she began, her tone steady but hollow. Not everything. Not the whole picture. But enough, Detective Harlow leaned forward. Enough to stop him? Claire's hands twisted in her lap. Enough to fear him. Enough to love him anyway. And enough to believe that if I spoke, he'd destroy me. Her words cracked, but she forced herself onward. So I stayed. I played the wife he needed me to be. And maybe in doing so, I let others pay the price. The confession spilled into the silence like poison. It wasn't an admission of guilt nor an exoneration. It was the gray space between. The realm where love and fear become indistinguishable. Do you realize what this means for you? Harlow asked carefully. Claire nodded. She had always known. She would forever live under the shadow of suspicion, a ghost tethered to Marcus's crimes. When she finally left the station, the late evening rain clung to her skin. Cameras still waited, lights flashing, but she walked past them, head bowed, each step heavier than the last. Her confession would not free her. It would only bind her more tightly to Marcus's legacy. And perhaps, she thought bitterly, that was his final victory. Not the fraud, not the missing woman, not the verdict, but the way he had carved his darkness into her soul until it became her own. The line between victim and accomplice had blurred, and maybe it had always been blurred, and the world would never stop asking which side she truly belonged to. The trial had ended. The reporters had moved on, and Marcus's name was carved into crime history. Yet for Claire, the silence that followed was louder than any gavel strike. Her house became a mausoleum of memory, every corner echoing with his laughter, every mirror reflecting a version of herself she no longer recognized. At night, she still heard him. Marcus's voice lingered in the dark, smooth and commanding, whispering doubts only she could hear. You needed me. You still do. She pressed her palms against her ears until they ached, but the phantom of his control was not so easily silenced. She avoided the kitchen most of all. The tiles had been scrubbed clean, but Claire swore she could still see the faint outline of blood, where her trembling hands once slipped against the floor. Each glance dragged her back to that stormy night. The confrontation, the chaos, the sharp smell of iron in the air. The public called her a survivor. though some whispered she was an accomplice who had hidden behind love. Neither word fit. She lived in the in-between, a space where guilt and grief intertwined until they were impossible to separate. On her dresser lay the old photograph, Marcus and the missing woman, smiling as if the world were theirs. Claire had tried to destroy it once, tearing it into pieces, but she found herself taping it back together, unable to let it go. It wasn't just evidence of Marcus's betrayal. It was proof of how blind she had been, how love had disarmed her more effectively than any weapon. Documentarians later declared the case one of the most twisted ever recorded. They dissected Marcus's fraud, his forged lives, the missing women, but what captured them most was Claire herself, not because of what she did or didn't do, but because she embodied the most terrifying truth of all, that devotion, when poisoned, can be more dangerous than cruelty. In the final interview she gave, Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "I thought love would save me. Instead, it destroyed me." And as the cameras faded and the world turned its gaze elsewhere, she was left in the silence after, a silence filled not with peace, but with the unrelenting echo of a love that had become her prison.